What is up there, YouTube? This is J-Man Time, and today I have a video on the ongoing Nagorno Karabakh conflict currently happening now between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the Nagorno Karabakh region, or the Nagorno Karabakh self-proclaimed autonomous state. Now, since the 1980s, both Azerbaijan and Armenia have been fighting over a small region in the Caucasus region known as the Nagorno Karabakh region. And this region has been fought over since about 1987-1988. Now, over the last 30 plus years, the conflict has mostly been skirmishes, but since September of 2020, the conflict has become a semi-full-blown war between both Azerbaijan and Armenia, along with the self-proclaimed state of Nagorno Karabakh, also known as Artsakh. Both Armenia and Artsakh are on the same side, as Nagorno Karabakh or Artsakh is considered its own independent state and has its own separate defense force, which is funded by both Armenia and secretly by Russia and Iran, at least in terms of small arms. Now, since September, the Azeri forces, or the military of Azerbaijan, has launched a low-level blitzkrieg into Nagorno Karabakh. And legally, they actually have the right to do this because Nagorno Karabakh is legally considered part of Azerbaijan and has been since the 1990s, and is recognized as part of Azerbaijan by neighboring Turkey, Russia, and even the United States and Georgia, which is the countries that largely surround both Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Nagorno Karabakh. So as a result, most countries do not recognize Nagorno Karabakh as its own independent state, and the only countries that really recognize this is Armenia and to an extent Iran. Since September, the Azerbaijani forces have captured roughly 30% of Nagorno Karabakh. So it's gotten to the point where I honestly don't think Nagorno Karabakh will last much longer. The armed forces of Nagorno Karabakh, or the Artsakh Defense Force, only has about 25 to 30,000 troops versus the Azeri army, which has between 180 and 280,000 troops at any given point. So technically, if Azerbaijan wanted to, they could just openly invade Nagorno Karabakh with the full might of their military, and they could actually take the region in less than a month. But so far, they have resorted to using only a small portion of their own armed forces, along with some mercenaries from places like Turkey and Syria. As a result of this, the Nagorno Karabakh Defense Force has pretty much been overrun in many areas of the territory. They have lost the entire border of Iran, as Nagorno Karabakh actually bordered Iran to an extent. And Azeri forces are now attacking from the north in an area of Nagorno Karabakh that is largely just open valleys, which is pretty perfect for tanks and heavy armored fighting vehicles. Keep in mind, Nagorno Karabakh does not have that many tanks or armored fighting vehicles. They mostly rely on vehicles that come from Armenia, as Armenia is the main supplier of weapons and tanks to Nagorno Karabakh. I honestly believe that Nagorno Karabakh might not last that long. If this war doesn't stop before January, I think the Azeri forces will capture at least 50 to 75% of the territory before January 2021. But that's just my prediction. Now, keep in mind, Nagorno Karabakh and Armenia do get small arms from both Russia and Iran to an extent, but Azerbaijan has more advanced weapons that are imported from Turkey and Israel. This is actually the second conflict in the last decade in which both Russia and Israel were fighting each other in the form of a proxy war. Now, during this conflict, there are Russian and Israeli military advisors in the region. There are Russian advisors in Armenia, and there are Israeli advisors in Azerbaijan, along with Turkish advisors that are also in Azerbaijan. And as I mentioned earlier, Iran has gotten involved to a very limited extent Iran has signed a military agreement with Armenia back in the 1990s, so they actually supply Armenia with some weapons, as Armenia actually does border Iran in a very small region that sits between both Azerbaijan and Nagorno Karabakh, and an Azerbaijani autonomous region that is actually separate from mainland Azerbaijan, known as the Nagorno Republic. So Armenia is pretty boxed in, along with Nagorno Karabakh. And Nagorno Karabakh is largely surrounded by Azerbaijan, especially to the eastern area of the country. And after watching pretty much hours of combat footage, the armed forces of Nagorno Karabakh, along with the mercenaries, and yes, there are mercenaries coming from Armenia, have pretty much been eviscerated. Armed forces of Azerbaijan have captured over 180 villages and towns, along with 4 major cities that were once part of Nagorno Karabakh, and are now recaptured by Azerbaijan as of November 2020. And over 500 tanks and armored fighting vehicles that of the Nagorno Karabakh forces and Armenian forces have been destroyed on the battlefield, largely due to advanced Israeli and Turkish attack drones or attack UAVs that were imported by Azerbaijan over the last 20 years. And these drones have wreaked havoc on tanks and convoys operating in the Nagorno-Karabakh region, belonging to both the Nagorno-Karabakh Defense Force and the Armenian Army or mercenaries operating in the region. I honestly believe that Nagorno-Karabakh simply doesn't have the resources to maintain the war. Now, there are some people that are asking for a ceasefire, but honestly, at this point, I don't think there's a reason for Azerbaijan to accept any ceasefire. They already recaptured at least 30% of the territory that was once part of this autonomous state or separatist state of Nagorno-Karabakh, and they only got about 67 to 70% left of the territory left to capture, and that's really it. And only about maybe 50 to 60% of the remaining territory is actually habited, like there's actually towns or villages. The rest of the territory is just open valleys and small hills and mountain ranges. So as a result, the Azeri forces are pretty much winning as far as I can see. And I honestly don't know if Nagorno-Karabakh is going to last past January of 2021. Now, I actually made this video because I was doing research on homemade weapons of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict since the 1980s. And I was actually shocked at the amount of territory that Nagorno-Karabakh has actually lost over the last 30 to 40 days. Like I said, if the Azeris wanted to, they could just openly declare war on both Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia. But for now, they seem to only be attacking Nagorno-Karabakh and are only fighting Armenian forces that are in the region instead of fighting Armenian troops based in Armenia itself. The reason is simple, because Armenia can't declare war on Azerbaijan either. Turkey is right next to Armenia, and Armenia doesn't want to get invaded, and they don't want to draw Russia into the conflict because that'll pretty much be World War III for all we know. And as a result, the Armenians are pretty much just holding out themselves as the only real supplier, or the only one supplying, I guess, mercenaries to the region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Iran is the only other one that's helping Nagorno-Karabakh in terms of small arms. They have given Armenia small arms like rifles and machine guns, and even some unarmored utility vehicles that can be used as technicals, and those have been supplied to the forces of Nagorno-Karabakh, along with the mercenaries coming from Armenia that are operating in that region. So yeah, and Iran is pretty strange in this conflict because Iran has a population of about 29%, or about 20 to 29% of Iran's population are ethnic Azeris, or Azerbaijanis, or at least Persians with Azerbaijani ancestry that live in Iran. So Iran cannot openly get involved in the conflict like they did in Syria and Iraq, like they did during the Syrian War, Iraq, or even the Lebanon War. So it seems like Nagorno-Karabakh is just toast. I don't know how they can fight back. They don't have the drone technology that Azerbaijan has, And Armenia could only do so much without openly declaring war on Azerbaijan and risk being attacked by Turkey and maybe even NATO. So I don't know what they're going to do. If they don't find a way to beat back the Azeri forces, I don't think Nagorno Karabakh is going to exist beyond early 2021. So what do you all think of this? Please tell me in the comment section below. And until next time, this was J-Man Time, signing off.